Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of The Psych Crusader. I'm your host, The Expendable. So, this week's going to be a big one. It's one that I've been waiting to do because I've studied it a very, very long time, and it's relatively new information a little bit in the psych world. So it's something that has kind of migrated and merged over time. And it's, in my opinion, it's one of the most potential dangerous situations that we have in the psychiatric world. But first comes first. If you like my show, like, subscribe, and ding the bell. All right, let's have a good time. So this week, we're going to talk about what they call the Dark Triad. The Dark Triad is basically, it's a psychological theory. It's a theorem that describes a set of 3 personality traits. You have narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. Now, we're going to go through and try to explain what all of those are in depth, so that way there's no confusion. So there's a lot that goes into this. It's very complicated. And so I'm going to try to do this as slow and as informative as possible. If this takes me 2 or 3 segments to get this done, then that's so be it. That's what we'll do. So let's start off with, talking a little bit more about the Dark Triad. So all 3 traits share characteristics like lack of empathy, interpersonal hostility, and interpersonal offensiveness. Now, you can pretty much kind of figure out what those mean, but just to kind of summarize, so you have empathy. People lack of empathy is going to fit this whole picture very well. Generally, people in the Dark Triad have 0 feelings towards other people. They do not connect. It is a very difficult thing for them to do. So if you run into people that exert a lot of like a lack of empathy, like they just do not feel for other people, then we may be looking at something that leads down this path. I'm not necessarily saying that that's where they're at, but it's something that could lead down that path. So like interpersonal hostility and interpersonal offensiveness is pretty self-explanatory. You're basically going to be hostile toward and offensive towards yourself. Whether you're mentally just constantly beating yourself up all the time, because generally these people with this kind of condition do not allow people to see their weaknesses. So they tend to beat themselves up internally, and they take it out on themselves all the time. Very, very, very large self-esteem issues. So a number of measures have been developed to measure all 3 Dark Triad traits simultaneously. So you have like a system, it's like the Dirty Dozen, then there's the Short Dark Triad. Most of these measures are questionnaire, like it's just like a questionnaire. You read it and answer it. They're either self-response or observer response, so they can be done several different ways. Both methods can prove problematic when attempting to measure any socially aversive trait. So this isn't a perfect way to do it, but we're going to talk about it because it's a way to identify. And identification, as people who watch my show a lot, self-identification is the most important thing. If you can't self-identify with your psychiatric issues or even the symptoms that you're facing, then you're going to have a very tough time getting on the road to, some kind of balance or recovery. So self-identification. Self-responders may be motivated to lie, and the observer, like with the observer responses, we're going to kind of break down this mental breakup that where you're not going to be able to believe anything these types of people say. Individuals who are skilled at deceiving and manipulating others should be perceived as low in deceptiveness and manipulation by others, resulting in inaccurate ratings. So you're going to have this lying and manipulating, and they're going to steer you in a certain direction that's away from where they want you to look. And that's pretty typical. That's pretty much everything that these types of people that go through this they're going to do. They're going to constantly be deflecting you over here. That's going to lead you into their little whatever it is they're trying to get out of you, but it is also going to drive you as far away from their self-esteem issues as possible. So one study claimed that the Dirty Dozen gives you mixed results on the construct validity of previous studies done on it. To show this, the study used a sample of over 3,000 people and measured the convergent validity of the traits of other measures and questionnaires. So it's just difficult. That's basically saying that they had a tough time really dialing in the data because of the manipulation and the lies. And there's so many different complexities that are involved in testing people with this condition. They used response theory to analyze all the results. This showed that there was an uneven distribution in the traits and that the scale was better at revealing Machiavellianism and psychopathy than narcissism. So the narcissism one is a little more shady, and we have covered narcissistic personality disorder in earlier segments. So if you want to get caught up on that, just look for it in my videos. Eventually you'll find it. Despite these challenges and the acknowledged commonalities among the Dark Triad traits, there is evidence that the three traits are distinct, and that is basically true. I agree with that. The traits are distinct, and they can be isolated. So let's talk about Machiavellianism. That way people can understand. For those of you who do not know what Machiavellianism is. I got to scroll down on my notes real quick. So it's a tendency to manipulate others, be indifferent to morality, and focus on self-interest. So they're going to, it's a major deception, okay? So you're basically going to manipulate someone from their moral compass, and you're going to put them, it's kind of like if any of you are familiar with what the Overton window is, where you have a range, you have the least likely thing that, the easiest thing that you're willing to accept and the most radical thing that you're willing to accept. And basically people with Machiavellianism are going to constantly be moving your Overton window. So they're going to slide it over to make it just a little bit more radical than what you're normally used to doing. So that hopefully that kind of gives you a better idea of how that works. They're going to get you out of your morality. And once they get you out of your morality and you go into this like darker place, they're going to be able to maneuver you wherever they want you to be at. You've trusted them to move your morality, and now they have you. And they're going to puppeteer you for whatever it is that they want. And we'll get into some of the motivations of that here in a second. So people who score high on this trait, conceptualized in the year 1970 by psychologist Richard Christie and Florence Geis, they're callous, unprincipled, and excessively motivated by self-interest. They're very, very self-perplexed people. They view interpersonal manipulation as the key for life success and behaving accordingly. So this is one of the situations where they are basically going to mow you over at some point. They're going to manipulate you, get you in line, and when they're ready to achieve whatever it is that they're sought after, they're going to mow you over. So people with low Machiavellianism, a high level, if they're running at a high level, They tend to have low agreeableness and consciousness. So that's a big one too. Um, they are never going to see things your way. And they are not going to be very rational at what they're doing. It's going to be very irrational. People from the outside are going to see this happening, but the people that they are targeting are not. They're going to be very, very slick and sly at what they do. The original published version of the Mach 5 or Mach 4, I'm sorry, is the most widely used measure in empirical research. So this is something that they're still trying to master a little bit. So it's there's still probably more to add to the story. Now let's go into narcissism. I'm going to give you a real short synopsis of that because we've already covered this in previous shows. So narcissism is a sense of superiority, grandiosity, and excessive self-importance. You are better than everyone else in your mind, in your world. The whole world revolves around you and nothing else matters. You're not even going to be able to have simple conversations with other people without hyping yourself up. And you're going to take over everything, every conversation. You're going to own it. So individuals who score high on narcissism display grandiosity, entitlement, very entitled. There's Shauna. And they're going to experience superiority. So narcissism has been found to correlate positively with extroversion and openness, and negatively with agreeableness. Narcissism has also been found to have significant correlation with psychopathy. So that's basically when we look at that part of the Dark Triad. We talked about the Machiavellianism. Now we're adding the narcissism, and now we're going to go into the psychopathy, because that's what's really going to set this condition over the edge. You have the self-importance, you have the with the narcissism, and with the Machiavellianism, you have the manipulation and setting your chess pieces without remorse. And now we're going to use the psychopathy to really set this in motion. So psychopathy is a tendency to be impulsive, callous, or remorseless. This is a dangerous, dangerous condition to have. If you have issues with psychopathy, you are going to be extremely remorseless. I know the perfect example of this whole scenario, but out of respect for people, I am not going to talk about it, but I really, really want to, because it's a great example. However, I'm not going to. So you have an impulsiveness where you look at something. Psychopathy can be very unpredictable. You could be looking at someone and they're fine, and then they are triggered very quickly and impulsively are basically into their psychopath mode. So, and they are going to be remorseless. They are going to be ruthless, and they are going to lack all empathy that anyone could possibly have. Their empathy is probably in the negative. So they tend to engage in antisocial behavior. Oh, my dogs are down here making noise. So the symptoms that are like part of this disorder. So psychopathy is considered the most malevolent of the Dark Triad, which we just talked about. It's dangerous. This is a dangerous thing to have. And if you have no idea this is going on, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but you are probably heading down a very, very disturbing path. I am not going to sugarcoat this for you. I am not going to, mask this for you and tell you that everything's going to be fantastic and great. You have to put a lot of work in as a person to fight the triad off. And it's hard to do because you've got three different major things going on in your mind. So, that's kind of part of what we do here on the Psych Crusader. We're not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to, give you some coping skills and some psychiatric assignments to go home and practice. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep it real. And I'm going to tell you, this is a difficult thing. It's dangerous and difficult. So next. So one of the disorders that comes out of this theorem, like I said, this is a theorem. It is not an official psychiatric condition, but it's a series of them put into one. So when we look at the narcissistic personality disorder, people with this disorder may have an inflated sense of self-worth, expect special treatment, and have difficulty managing their emotions. So, Shauna, I might be a narcissist because I really feel like I should deserve special treatment all the time. I'm just saying, that's what I do. So, antisocial personality disorder. That is going to be a difficult one. And I probably should have covered this in one of my earlier episodes, but we have not really touched on antisocial personality disorder all that much. I'm going to do it eventually. So people with this disorder may be hostile, aggressive, and disregard the rights of others. They may also have a history of criminal behavior. So it's just basically where you're just not used to being in a social setting. You're not used to communicating with people. No, you can't get canceled on my show, Shauna. Nobody gets canceled on my show. You get it. We have free speech. Listen, we're not in communist China. So that's basically the gist of antisocial personality disorder. You just have a very tough time in social settings. It's awkward, and so they look for an outlet. There's no social outlet, so a lot of times they get into criminal behavior because that's the alternate outlet. Instead of going to something productive where they can engage in a social setting with peers and whatnot, they don't do it. They're terrified of it, and they'll go off and do their own thing and generally get arrested. So next is the schizoid personality disorder. People with this disorder may appear cold and uninterested in others and may have difficulty expressing their emotions. So this is another symptomatic disorder that goes along with the triad. This is just exactly what it says. You're just a cold person. You're lacking a lot of emotion. You don't show it. You look at it as your emotions are your weakness. And so that's basically the breakdown of the schizoid personality disorder. I knew you were trying to say that, Shauna. Shauna said it's my white privilege, which she's probably right. Psych. Where was I at? See, she gets on my show and then she distracts me. So those are the basic two symptomatic disorders that can go along with the triad. It makes me think I'm talking about like a Chinese organized crime gang all the time when I talk about the Dark Triad. A lot of people don't even know this exists. So, I'm glad that we're covering it. Like I said, this is one of my favorite disorders. I've studied it for a very long time. So let's get into the behaviors. Some of the things that people with this situation, with this theory, go through. So some people, a lot of your internet trolls could pose this because this is their only way to hide their self-esteem issues behind anonymous social media presences and still get to go out there and bully and try to manipulate people. It's very common. It happens all the time. I'm on all the most controversial social media outlets, and this is what they do. So when we're looking at trolling, so recent studies have found that people who are identified as internet trolls tend to have dark personality traits and show signs of sadism, antisocial behavior, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. The 2013 case study suggests that there are a number of similarities between antisocial and flame trolling activities. And the 2014 survey indicated that the trolling is a manifestation of everyday sadism. So they're using trolling to initiate a receptor, the sadistic receptor, where they want to poke and prod at people as a means of torture, sadistic torture, to try to get that negative response out of people, and they get off on that, and that's just how it works. So, and I'm going to do this one eventually too, but we're going to cover Trump derangement system, TDS syndrome, Trump derangement syndrome. So I'm going to cover that eventually, and probably a lot of people won't. Some people, half the country will like it, half the country won't. There, we'll put it that way. But I'm going to do it anyway because it's my show. I'll do whatever I want. There, see? Narcissism right there. My show, I'll do whatever I want. So both studies suggest that this trolling may be linked to bullying, which is obviously, I don't think you need a study to know that. In both adolescents and adults, a 2021 study found that the Dark Triad's influence may be mediated by malicious motives, and that there's no strong connection between having these traits and engaging in trolling. So, they're still going through all that, but internet trolling is a part of that, especially with the sadistic side of it. And a lot of people probably have never put two and two together when it comes to internet trolling and sadism, but it's true. So crime. Let's talk about criminals. There's no criminals in America, right? Trump's already deported them all. No. So adolescents who score higher in Dark Triad traits show higher amounts of violent delinquency. Obviously, I think this goes hand in hand. I think if you end up on the triad, you are probably going to commit some crime, probably a lot of crime. Individuals with low self-control and Dark Triad traits showed more overall delinquency. However, higher self-control lowered the delinquency. So it just depends on where you are at as a person in your ability to deal with your own self-control. Can you moderate your self-control? That's going to be totally up to you as to how far down this darkness in the crime that you go. Hopefully that you all develop how to have your own self-control, and you will not make it to that point where you're committing crimes where you need to be arrested. So those higher in psychopathy and Machiavellianism were shown to predict psychological abuse with intimate partner violence. However, agreeableness was found to be the main factor. So there you have it's a control thing. They have to manipulate because they have to hide their self-esteem issues. So they manipulate, and what they can't manipulate and outsmart, then the psychopathy kicks in, and generally things get violent. So you're playing chess 1 minute, and when you can't outsmart your opponent, you beat your opponent physically. So this is a very, very, you almost have an alpha and a beta in the same mindset at the same time, but you get the same end pattern of abuse result. I could put it as plainly as I can. So it talks about cyber crimes too, where people, I think that kind of covers with what we were just talking about. With cyber crimes, you can escalate crime a lot quicker, which is something, because it doesn't take much to commit a cyber crime. You don't have to do a whole lot of plotting and planning. And you can be very stealth, and Machiavellianism is a stealth kind of thing. So cybercrime's a good, I don't want to say good. I just basically said that's good. That's a good crime for those people. No, but being Machiavellianism and cyber crimes kind of go hand in hand because you get to kind of fly under the radar, which is what they want to do. It's really weird because my show last night I had a bunch of interference, and now I've gone through half the show and I haven't really had any glitches, so it's kind of making me weirded out a little bit. So let's go into ideologies and some of the different progressions through this. So the Dark Triad characteristics correlate with support for various extremist ideologies, support for the alt-right, which was prolifically associated with online trolling and harassment, and politically correct authoritarianism. They both correlate with all three traits as well as a measure of entitlement. To a lesser extent, support for a more liberal form of political correctness correlates negatively with psychopathy. Hey, there's Sarge, old Sarge. Well, good thing you don't need to watch me to drive. You just listen. But to a lesser extent, the liberal part of it is it correlates less with the psychopathy because generally liberals are more passive aggressively. They want you to think they're not, but they are, in fact, as what we're seeing with this snow boots thing. James, hello. So everybody's heard about the cute snow boots thing movement that these liberals are doing. They're trying to get you to think they're going to commit some violence, but at the end of the day, they're not really going to do anything. It's just a right. So that's kind of how that kind of works. It does work politically. There's two different ideologies to applying the Dark Triad, just like what we said. Just like what I said about the, where I'm sorry, I'm trying to read comments and talk at the same time, so I get distracted. Where we have the alpha and the beta at the same time, and when you're doing the whole triad, you tend to be both. You can be both because the Machiavellianism allows you to be a beta, where the psychopathy allows you to be more of an alpha, and then you have the narcissism, which can apply to both. So it's definitely a complex thing where it almost could be where you have a personality disorder as well. So there's a lot going on with the triad. So they've been doing studies on this as far as left and right wing. I don't know why they picked it, but this happened in 2022. So I'm guessing it was like they're trying to find a way to blame one side or the other for thinking a certain way. I'm not sure, but generally when these super Harvard guys get involved, they're always trying to point. They're trying to use Machiavellianism to get their agenda across, basically. So now, psychopaths are impulsive and usually erratic. Very true. It's just like I think you kind of missed it. See, I'm not. It can go both ways. Generally, a beta is not going to act physically, where the alphas will tend to act physically. So that's the only reason why I threw that out as the example, because that's in the several times I've seen the Dark Triad, that's generally how it worked out, is where the betas would kind of work under the radar and until they got to the point to where they couldn't outsmart you, and then they would lash out physically. So that's kind of how that worked. But in relationships, so we have a relationship situation with this too. Now, how do people in the Dark Triad deal with relationships? Are they just bound to be single the rest of their lives? How does a relationship work and look in this theorem. Um, so they've done plenty of studies and whatnot on this, and I'm gonna paraphrase a lot. But psychologists have studied how the dark triad traits affected individuals in their romantic relationships. In most cases, these traits cause people to have short-term relationships. Because generally, if you're in a committed relationship with somebody, and it's just like when you as a person and you've been around somebody long enough, you start to pick up on their little ticks and their little traits and whatnot. Your partner may be tricked at first, but at some point they're going to look back at you and go, I'm being duped by this person. And they're going to see it. And so that's why generally their relationships are short term, because no matter how slick you think you are in the dark triad, your partner is going to eventually see right through you because they've seen every angle of you. So that's generally why long-term relationships just don't go hand in hand with this situation, because generally, trust is a big part of relationships. And if you can't trust your partner to, ever keep it honest with you ever, which the people in the triad are not ever going to be honest. They're going to be constantly manipulating, constantly trying to twist things, constantly trying to get you moving in this direction to hide what they're doing over here. So that's kind of how the relationship side of this disorder goes, or theorem. I shouldn't call it a disorder because it's not. It's a series of disorders put together into one. So the people who tend to score higher in these traits will gravitate towards relationship types such as like one night stands, because they get that thrill. They get the thrill part out of it. Or the hookups or booty calls, whatever you want to call it. So the people who score like highly in the dark triad traits, they also tend to be less likely to have long-lasting relationships. They're very short. We've already talked about it. And they report lower relationship satisfaction. So the problem that they have in a relationship is the high. So if you're in an average relationship and you have this mentality, you have this triad mentality, you're not going to get that high out of your partner every day. You may get tiny bits and pieces of it, but there's a massive receptor in thinking and maneuvering and self-loathing and then self gratification. So you have all these different things going on, and your partner's not going to be able to intellectually keep up with you. One, because you're not letting them. Two, because they're not going to understand all this that's going on in your head anyway. Or it's going to take them a minute to figure it out, like a long time. So they're also more willing to terminate relationships than people who score lower in the triad. So generally they're going to go, this isn't for me. No, I'm not getting anything out of this. I'm out. So that's generally what happens. They'll just move on to the next target. Everything's an op to them. So you just have to, as a woman, and you start seeing some of these characteristics, expect to end up being treated like an op, or just a temporary fix to a receptor until that receptor doesn't react anymore, and then they need to move on to another one. A study published in 2020 proposed that men who embody the dark tetrad are well represented among the clientele of prostitutes. So we'll get into the tetrad here in a little bit. However, the authors admit that there's a dearth of research on the personality characteristics that typify men who buy sex from others who do not, while other researchers have claimed that there is no evidence of a particular quality that differentiates customers in general from men who have not paid for sex. That is, James, you're absolutely on the dot with that one. Everything is immediate. It's immediate gratification, immediate needs. They're very impulsive, and they'll deal with repercussions later, and when they manipulate their way out of it. But generally, yes, you're correct. They're very, very survivalistic. They'll do whatever it takes to survive. and they will run over anybody to stay ahead of the game. Where the hell is my page at? So all three of the Dark Triad traits have been found to have substantial genetic, and we're coming out of we're starting to migrate out of the sexual side of it a little bit, but they have genetic components. So a lot of people go, well, what causes this? It's very genetic. You're gonna have when you separate all three of the conditions that go with the triad, generally they are part of your environment. It's a trigger, it's a trauma trigger of some sort that you've had that turns on, and then you have this one that turns on, and then you have this one that turns on, and then boom, here we are right there in the triad. It's a mental defense mechanism to stop your hurt and trauma, and it's very environmental. However, it is also genetic. If it's easy to turn on, it's going to be easy to turn on throughout your DNA. So you have to watch your children, you have to watch your parents, you have to watch your family members, and generally, this is very common amongst white men. So if you are a white man, you are more likely to have this happen to you. Yes, generally low IQ on average. However, when you add the triad in, that part of it is the low IQ part, but the Machiavellianism and somewhat the narcissism is where your IQ points do come from, because you're constantly in thought and you're processing, you're problem solving, you're constantly living in an algorithm in your brain, so you're just going through it. So we're talking about environmental factors. They contribute to the development of the triad. They have less influence. They're less influence. They have less influence than genetics. So the genetics is more important than the environmental factors. You're right in a sense that in the research is incomplete. That's part of the problem. So when you look at people who research the stats of it, a lot of the demographics are not represented properly. So the numbers are skewered, but in a lot of the studies that I've read, they've blamed it on Caucasian men. And yes, we do statistically know that men are likely to be the psychopathic of between man and woman. That's pretty common. I mean, I think with the hormonal issues and the food that we ingest, I think we're seeing more than normal come out of the female side of things. But I don't think that that's part. I mean, it's environmental, but it's not environmental at the same time. I think we're ingesting a lot of stuff that's screwing up our brains. I mean, I think at the end, when they get all of this all these studies done in the next 4 years, I think we're going to have a very clear picture with what chemicals exactly are doing the most damage and what we need to take out of our food. I blame the food for a lot of this stuff because statistics have been rising over the years, and it's because of the trash that we eat, in my opinion, of course. So during going back into the environmental factors, having a less influence than the genetic side of it. So during childhood and adolescence, environmental factors are not shared with siblings necessarily, because because they can have different friends, they can participate in different activities. So they do have somewhat of a similar but yet different path in their life. I mean, if it's a household problem, like amongst the family members or parents, you can tend to all develop some symptoms of this. However, at some point you're going to break off from your siblings if you have them. Only Machiavellianism is related to environmental factors that are shared with siblings somehow. I'm going to have to do a little bit more thinking on that one. But I mean, it kind of makes sense. So the results of a study among German adolescents reveal a positive association between the experience of parental rejection by both parents and punishment, as well as parental control and overprotection and Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. So they've gone through and they've tested these waters. What if the parents do this? What if the parents do that? What if the parents what environmental factors, what triggers, what happens? And so they have kind of an idea of what's going on in those situations and in households when there's children involved. Some researchers have interpreted these findings to mean that of the three, Machiavellianism is the trait most likely to be influenced by the environment, which is true, because narcissism, you create the environment. You're so self-absorbed, the environment's not as relevant to you. And like psychopathy is very reactive. So if you're not triggered, you're not reacting. To where Machiavellianism is more, you're playing your environment all the time. I hate when my cursor don't work right. James, forensic psychologist. I like crime. I like criminal brains. So the evolution theory, we're going to talk about that real quick because we are starting to get on time. I'm going to have to make a part 2 of this because there's so much to cover with this. We haven't even gotten into any of the treatment options or things that you can attempt to do to treat this, or the impact of having family in the therapy to help you with your treatment, which I think is going to be we'll talk about that next week. However, evolutionary theory, it may also explain the development of the Dark Triad traits. Despite the relationship of these traits with clinical disorders, some argue that adaptive qualities may accompany the maladaptive ones. Their frequency in the gene pool requires at least some local adaptation, which is, that's generally true. The everyday versions of these traits appear in student and community samples, where even like high levels can be observed among individuals who manage to get along in daily life. So this is something that it does seem to have a shelf life, so to speak. You have the symptoms, they adapt and they merge and they're effective. But then it just kind of is like, okay, well, you've hit this apex where I think generally the apex is either you identify with it and you can cap your behavior, or you're going to supersede the behavior and end up probably in jail, is generally what happens. So even in these samples, like research indicates correlation with aggression, racism, and bullying, among other forms of social aversiveness. So you have those factors to play with as well. Everything ends up being aggressive at the end. And, I think it's almost like a shotgun order of doing things. So, you have your Machiavellianism, you set your plan. You're self-absorbed in yourself, and then you have aggression. So it's a difficult situation, and I don't wish this upon anyone. And I think it's going to be key to really look at the people around you. If you start to see people that have these characteristics, or if you think you yourself have these characteristics, I think to be honest with yourself, like I said in several of my other shows before this, what I do every morning to deal with my own issues is I take that 30 seconds every morning, and when I'm done brushing my teeth, and I look at myself in the mirror and I say, who am I today? And if I can answer myself, I know what kind of day it's going to be. And if I'm feeling good, and I can look at myself in the eyes and I can say, there you are. It's going to be a good day today. But if I look at myself and I'm going, man, I woke up triggered. It's not going to be a good day. Now, how do I get ahead of it? I know I'm triggered today. How do I get ahead of it so I can keep from disastrous behaviors from happening? So that's just one thing that we can do with people in these situations, that we can kind of teach them to self-identify, teach them to, get ahead of the reactions that they're likely gonna exert. So, and I'm going to just kind of wrap this one up for the day, because I don't want to get into the next stage of this segment until next week. However, I can't encourage you all to take the Dark Triad seriously. It's something that you can't play with. It can go from 0 to 1,000 very fast, and by then it's too late. I've seen this happen several times throughout the course of my career. James, I am not. No, I am not. But I've seen it. I've seen it several times. I've worked in facilities where the worst of the worst. We've talked about this as a staff with other facilities that experience these same types of things. So I've been involved in research, a lot of research in this, and with my own observations of generally juveniles that have gone through that are starting to exert these behaviors. So I've seen these start to play out. Yes, but I am not. No, I just have my own issues, and a lot of the times, some of the self-identification tools that we can use can apply to many different other situations, which I think being self-aware of your own struggles is something that would work here. I think that's kind of how that goes. Okay. Now, Mr. James, I certainly hope that you join me next week, because since you're going to be specific, I'm going to dive into that for you, buddy. So we will talk about that if you're comfortable, obviously. But this is a safe space. I don't tolerate any shenanigans in here by people that want to come in and start messing with people. So you're safe in the chats, and actually the live chats don't show up on when I repost it. So this will all go away. I appreciate that, and I'm very excited to continue this conversation. Okay, got all my notes done for you, bud. So that's going to be the end of my show for the day. I hope we've learned something. I know that this is not a common thing, and a lot of people in the public do not know anything, that they didn't even know the Dark Triad existed. I was talking to some people the other day. They're like, "What are you going to do your show on?" And I was like, "The Dark Triad." They're like, "What are you talking about? I've never heard of that." And so I thought, you know what, this is a good time to get it out there, because there are people out there that do go through this, and I've seen the horrors of this, and it is truly a struggle. And I know next week when we dive into this with James, he's probably going to be able to give us his personal insight as to what he struggles with, and what can we do to attempt to get ahead of it a little bit. There's no cure, everybody. There's no cure to this, and it's going to come all on your therapy and your self-identification, and how can you get ahead of it. So thanks everybody for being in the chats. I've had a good time. You guys are fantastic. Sarge, I know you're up there too. Shauna, I'll see you at work tomorrow. But join me next week. We're going to hit this on a part 2, and I'm out. Everybody be safe. Peace.